right. Well, thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate the time to join us on our fireside chat. My name is David Bedard. I will be the moderator here today. I am the Senior Account Manager of Aerospace and Defense and also a CMMC registered practitioner here at KTL Solutions. KTL is a Microsoft Gold partner providing consulting, licensing, Dynamics Business Central services and consulting to a variety of clients from commercial to government. I handle the consultation or the pre-sales consultation on the CMMC NIST 800-171 with potential clients, kind of on their journey from the commercial infrastructure over to GCC or GCC High, along with setting up Dynamics 365 Sales, Business Central in Azure Government and GCC High. For today's chat, if you wouldn't mind just using the Q&A to enter in any questions that you might have. We'll address all the questions at the end. With that said, we're going to get started. I'm going to kick it over to Thomas to make himself, introduce himself, and then I'll introduce Andrew.
Sure, thanks, David. So I'm Dr. Thomas Graham. I work for Redspin, which is a division of Synergistic, as their Chief Information Security Officer as my day job. But I'm also a provisional assessor with CMMC-AB.
Okay, excellent. And Andrew, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about yourself and your role here at KTL.
Yep. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Lally, the Director of Technology at KTL Solutions. I oversee our IT consulting, help desk, and software development departments here. So as a Microsoft AOSG partner prior to CMMC being introduced, a large focus of our IT consultants and help desk has been with kind of assisting customers with their compliance needs. And so as part of that, I kind of oversee making sure we're on the right track and helping customers get where they need to be.
Excellent. So we'll just get right into it. And this question is for Thomas. What were the challenges unique to Redspin that, and what were your goals?
Oh, challenges. Where do I begin? So, David, much like everybody else, CMMC, it's new. It's built on, other well-established frameworks and directives. However, one of the key portions that it adds in is a maturity requirement, which luckily, we've done work with COVID before, which also has a maturity component, so we had some experience there. However, Redspin, this is a new arena for us. We didn't have a stake in the defense industrial base. We're not bidding on, federal government contracts, DoD contracts. So even though we have a good portion of our employee base that is ex-DoD, even myself, I worked with the DoD for well over 12 years in a variety of roles. It was still a new arena, so we had to reacquaint ourselves with the language, with the mechanics, and really how the defense industrial base works in 2021. One of the other primary challenges is, look, let's be honest, this was launched in COVID. This was launched in a time where 99% of US organizations all of a sudden become remote. It was a little bit easier for us because we were already about 95% remote workforce prior to COVID. So we had to take the approach of saying, okay, we don't have, everybody in one single location to where I can stick somebody at the door that's well armed and keep anybody that they don't know from coming in. We had to figure out how we were going to do this without that necessarily that main physical presence, and we were able to work through all of those things, luckily with KTL's help, to become the first authorized C3PA.
Excellent. So again, Thomas, I mean, through the pre-sales process, kind of what helped Redspin ultimately determine the selection of KTL to work on the configuration and setting up the secure enclave?
Sure, and as Andrew knows, the biggest thing was just timing. When CMMC first launched and we started figuring out what we had to do, we made a decision very early on that we wanted to use virtual infrastructure, which required, you know, a CSP, a cloud service provider for our data storage and in operations in CMMC arena. So we started reaching out to vendors, and full disclosure, I didn't really know anything about KTL prior to, you know, having those first discussions with you, David, and Andrew. But one of the biggest differentiators, at least for us at that point in time, was the timing. Other folks that we had reached out to were giving us a start date that really didn't help us with what we were trying to do, but KTL very quickly said, yes, we can work with you. We can work with that timing. Let's get it done. And so that's how we ultimately chose KTL for our implementation.
All right, thank you. And Andrew, this question is kind of for you. I mean, what was our first step in the process when KTL was working with Redspin prior to the project start?
Yeah, so those early discussions were not dissimilar to the same ones we have with all of our other kind of potential customers and customers. There's still that initial conversation long before we actually write up a kind of estimate, and we go through this with all of our customers that are looking to engage in some type of professional services. Just like if you're going to scope out your environment, we have to scope out what our level of effort is going to be, kind of see what you're looking to do, what's feasibly done, and through those conversations, which sometimes seem kind of long-winded, we hope to be able to ask additional questions, be able to maybe spot things that, from our experience, is it going to work well? There's a better solution for you, and ultimately at the end, be able to scope out what our role is in the process, and if given enough responsibility, be able to kind of scope out what your potential assessment scope will be. Specifically with Redspin, they did a lot of work prior to our call. They had a pretty good idea of what they wanted and what they were going for, and we're looking for kind of a Microsoft partner to help them get it over the finish line, do that technical implementation, and be able to kind of present them an environment of how it's going to work, get it to work, and kind of hand it over to them.
Okay. And, you know, really, since there was no data being migrated from another tenant, did that make kind of defining the scope process a little easier?
So that doesn't really come into play during these conversations. The migration of your data is really just a separate project or work order. And unless you plan on completely deleting or blowing up that other environment, the scope still needs to be figured out for that new environment. And so during those initial calls, whether we're going to be migrating data or not, we're still kind of trying to figure out what you want to do, where do you intend to store this data, because we're moving it somewhere, or you're going to create it and put it in that environment. Long term, that data is going to be somewhere, and we need to know where it's going to be. And so does it reduce your cost of an overall project if you're not moving data? Yes, but that project to set up this new environment, understand how things are going to work, and kind of hand it over to you, doesn't really change whether you're going to move data or not.
Okay. And Thomas, you know, when did Redspin start working on, you know, all the policies and procedures for the secure enclave, or did you kind of create that as you progressed along through the process?
Well, I mean, so I mentioned earlier, one of the key components of CMMC, especially when you're getting into maturity level 3, is that there's a maturity component. So the baseline for a lot of our policy and procedures was already set. We early on in our life cycle, and this is prior to CMMC, we made the decision we wanted to base as much of our internal security processes and procedures on NIST as we could that made sense for us and our use cases. So we had a tentative framework for some of those policies and procedures already in place. Now to get it to CMMC level, that we started on probably like the July, August timeframe of last year. And I mentioned that because part of the CMMC process is you have to do a self-assessment. Look internally. Hey, how are we doing? Where are we screwing up? What do we need to get in place? So once we got that done, then we were able to look at each of the additional areas and start putting those in place. But that doesn't mean we were done last year. Your policies and your procedures, but especially for your procedures, are really almost living documents. You update those as you go along, as you mature your own processes, the things you do internally. You go back, you review them, you track that you're reviewing them. Are the relevant stakeholders, the data owners of the individual CMMC domains, are they aware? Are they the owners of these procedures? And so we continue to work on those, and even after we got authorized, I mean, we're still, internally, we're still building, we're still revising and revamping how we're doing stuff. And as we come upon things, we're still working on it. And it's not a one and done event. You have to continually do this throughout your internal processes.
And as far as the assessment itself, around the CMMC assessment, how much of it fell under the shared responsibilities that Microsoft covered?
So, I hesitate to put a percentage on it, simply because a lot of folks, when you're talking inheritance, you say, okay, they're responsible. I don't have anything to do with it, and that's simply not the case. For our implementation, or the approach that we took, is we said, okay, we don't have that physical structure. So what are we relying on Microsoft for? So a lot of the physical security domains, the maintenance domains in your data centers, those types of items definitely fall within Microsoft. However, even with a virtual implementation, we all still have physical machines. So now we also have to address how we're satisfying the CMMC requirements for those physical machines. What's the physical security in our remote environment? If we have to get maintenance on our physical machines, how are we going about doing it? So it's not something just as simple as passing off to Microsoft, even though it helped tremendously. But it's something that when you go through assessment, you have to be able to definitively identify, okay, here is what your third party, you're inheriting from them. However, here is the components that you as the OSC are responsible for, regardless of if everything's getting stored in the cloud. Does that make sense?
Oh, that's great points. Great points. I guess this is a little bit for both you and for Andrew, but we'll let Andrew take a lead on this one. What are the advantages and disadvantages of setting up everything in a secure enclave?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the major advantages that I see is your kind of data sprawl risk is reduced as we have everything kind of inside of a virtual environment, kind of inside of one network, instead of bouncing around with people's laptops and computers. We can control that data leaving and only going out specific avenues that we open up, be it through the firewall or through email or something. It kind of makes it easier for your IT admins to understand how the data is flowing, as well as have greater control. Administration, once you get used to the environment, I think is a little bit easier. If something is wrong with the VM, it's having an error, an update was bad, something like that, I can very quickly just delete it, throw out a new one, let people reconnect, and you're good to go. In kind of a remote world, if someone's computer is having an issue, that's a problem. If it's a physical issue or something like that, getting them a new computer, or redoing updates when you can't be physically at the machine sometimes causes some major issues. So it does make kind of those things a lot easier to deal with. Some disadvantages, and it doesn't work for everybody. Obviously, if you need to work without an internet connection, you can't connect to a remote enclave. So that's going to be a non-starter for those environments. Your network complexity can get a little more complicated. As an example, we have plenty of manufacturing customers where they have ERP or manufacturing systems that work only if their thick clients are running in the same data center as their database application. And so they're using these enclaves to run their systems, but they still need to be able to print down to the shop floor. They need to be able to access other systems and feed data back. And so now we have to go a couple steps further, spin up VPNs and make sure those are working. And those are things you might not have to do if everything was kind of on-premise and laptops and that type of functionality. And so depending on how your environment's going, it may be a very simple solution to kind of get going, spin up, get configured, to something more complicated, but still provide a lot of advantages for you.
Okay. And Thomas, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Oh, sure. Actually, so one of the advantages I would definitely say is utilizing the GCC high architecture and setting up the enclave. Andrew alluded to this earlier, but when we did it, we wanted to take the approach of, okay, here's what we need, here's what the requirements are. Okay, let's create it, let's lock it down. Now as we started going into it, okay, what do we need access to finish making this a workable environment? So then we started opening it up. That's one of the tenets of CMMC is deny all, allow by exception. I think Andrew can agree with me that as we started down this process and started looking into it, we very quickly realized things that we hadn't even thought of that we needed to allow access into. I actually remember one night that he, myself, and Redspin's Director of Information Services, we were on the phone until I believe it was 1 a.m. Eastern, right, Andrew?
Yep.
Trying to troubleshoot, what was going on. So that also plays in, to one of the disadvantages. You don't have everything right in one place to where you can do it. You're at the mercy of the technology. So the other component for us that is really an advantage of using this setup is, I mentioned it earlier, we're remote. So when we started setting it up, we had decisions that we had to make, such as, do we want to now stand up another physical system, provide it to our folks, which now requires the secure shipping. It requires making sure everything is set up correctly once they get there. Now are they going to have to take two systems with them on any assessments they go on? So that way only the CUI information is utilized on one, company information on another. With using the GCC high architecture, it really provided us with a chance to only allow, or not allows, that's not the right word, but to alleviate some of those concerns, because we could use our own hardware and we could build everything within the VDI. The VDI, if regardless of you're using a Mac, you're using a Windows, you're using an Android tablet, smartphone, smartwatch, if you're trying to access this from a smartwatch, more power to you. But the onus on that is that once that VDI is up and running and once you're accessed, that environment is that environment. It's regardless of the type of technology that you're accessing it with. So that way, when you go through assessment, you can say, yes, I use mobile phones, for instance. However, if you try to access the environment, you're only going to get the environment on, a little 8x4 screen or whatever, and you're not going to be able to take anything out of it. So that was, one of the biggest advantages for us especially as we got into the assessment, we could very clearly and accurately identify where our boundaries were at. That scoping piece is hugely important when you're going through assessment, because if you get into the assessment and you don't know where CUI lives, that the assessors are going to probably going to end that assessment pretty quickly. And the reason being is because you have to understand where your data is at. So with us building this from scratch, we were able to say, here's where our data is going to be. Who are we going to give a key to the house so, they can come in and visit with us for a little while. Hopefully my analogies made a little bit of sense.
No, made perfect sense. I guess, Andrew, it's kind of to feed off of what Thomas just mentioned. What were some of the technical challenges that you ran up against while working with Thomas and his team in setting up the enclave?
So I don't think there are many technical challenges with deploying everything and getting it configured. With our kind of initial discussions with them, it became clear kind of what they were looking for and asking for was very similar to how KTL's own IT staff and help desk work in an environment to support our defense customers. So kind of getting that going, we already had experience with it. And so we're able to get that up and stood up and running. The kind of technical challenges that we kind of saw were not something that's out of the ordinary. So we started with a very conservative approach to everything. It was locked down to the point where you get to a machine, you can hit your email and just these are services we needed. And as you go, someone kind of goes through that, hey, we use this application or we need to access this. They're getting blocked, and you go through and see kind of where it's getting blocked. Is it the firewall IP restrictions? Are we doing DNS filtering? What is blocking it? And so that posed kind of the biggest technical challenge, because some of that stuff you kind of identify that we need, and someone's got to go hunt down what those URLs are. And some of those services, as people may be aware, have a lot of URLs or IP addresses that need to be whitelisted. Thankfully, there's kind of CLI, so you can kind of automate putting that stuff in there and not just hand jamming through the admin UI. But that is probably the biggest technical challenge we hit. There are some other stuff, kind of just standard GCC high type things where you kind of work through things aren't kind of working exactly like they should, and kind of dig around and figure out something's going on and resolve. But there was nothing like too difficult or completely crazy technically wrong getting it set up.
Okay. And Thomas, this question is for you. It's more pertaining to after you wiped the sweat off your brow, after the DIBCAC assessment was done, what was the process with the CMMC accreditation body in order to get approved and put up on the marketplace?
All right, so yes, when we made it through DIBCAC, of course, they finalized all their reports and provided to the AB. At that point in time, the AB actually come back to us with several questions, because DoD had added additional requirements on top of what everybody initially knew. So then we had to go through and actually address, some of those items. It's, how many folks do you have working on this? Do they pass the suitability? And it was several other questions. But the thing that I think you're trying to get at is that just because we made it through DIBCAC doesn't mean that the activity was finished, and that's because this is still a living process. CMMC today is different than CMMC when it was first launched. And the ability to not be so there's a term I'm fond of, process paralysis. Don't be so paralyzed in what you are doing that you can't deviate from what your plan is. And I think that helped us quite a bit, was that once we made it through those challenges, and once we finished the suitability requirements and everything. We, from that point, we didn't have too many other hurdles to getting authorized. It was the willingness to not be married to what we thought the process was going to be, or what even our own internal processes are, but being willing to change what we were doing to ensure we were meeting the guidelines and we were meeting the requirements to properly secure CUI within an enclave.
Okay, all right. And Andrew, now that KTL's set up a lot of these kind of secure enclaves, how has our process changed, or has it become more streamlined?
So I think our process has definitely become a lot more streamlined as we onboard more and more customers. There's similarities between kind of them all and how they get set up. So we're able to kind of take those and build out what would essentially be kind of a base template that then we customize moving forward. So at this point, we kind of have a process that's fairly automated to get going, to kind of reduce the time of work order sign to completion. And then a lot of things kind of spec'd out of, you need to do this, or this is the solution for that, and kind of go through it all. But at this point, I think with all of the environments we've stood up, we've kind of seen what I hope is almost everything, but I highly doubt we've seen it all. But we do have enough information to probably field the majority of customers and their requirements moving forward.
Okay. And Thomas, the DIBCAC, there's always questions around the DIBCAC. Was there any specific area that they kind of keyed in and focused in on during the assessment process that kind of, you just stood there and said, what, why do you keep doing it?
Well, first of all, I want to say, Andrew, if you ever do get a scoping to where a company is using completely smart watches, I want you to let me know, because then I really am going to fall out of my chair. But no, so David, with the assessment, you have technical items, you have physical items, you have administrative items, and honestly, I will tell you this, before I go any further. The very first question asked to us by the DIBCAC was not to myself as the Chief Information Security Officer. It wasn't to our Director of Information Services. It wasn't even to our CEO. Do you know who the first question was asked to? Our VP of Marketing. The reason being is because one of the requirements in CMMC is, how do you prevent CUI from getting on to public websites, public social media, which falls in the scope of what she and her team do. So Monday morning, bright and early, you're ready to go, and all of a sudden now your marketing person is your person out the door. But we had worked with her. She understood how she and her team did things. She was able to show that it was documented, be able to talk intelligently to the documentation. And I think that kind of set the playing field moving forward, which that kind of leads into your question. Specific areas. So a lot of the physical stuff, we talked about earlier, kind of inherited that from not only Microsoft, but also our backup solution provider, which, right now the discussion around CSPs is it has to be FedRAMP moderate or equivalent, and the equivalency really hasn't been too well defined yet. So we made a decision of making sure that we were using FedRAMP moderate certified CSPs. So that, that kind of made that portion a little bit easier. The technical stuff, show me a screenshot, show me how you're doing it with a screen share, because it was virtual. We did ours before the country started opening back up a little bit. So, those components are there. But where they really hit us home at was in our documentation. It was, show me your policy. Where in your policy does it say this? Show me your procedure. where in your procedure is this item for CUI information. One of the documents that kind of helped us out along the way is a responsibility traceability matrix. And what that does is it takes each domain, an area of CMMC, and it equates it to who is primarily responsible and whose secondary responsibility it is. So when we got to those questions about the documentation, the DIBCAC assessors knew who they were asking, could very quickly look at the documentation and ensure, yes, this person is identified as responsible. Yes, this person has signed off on it as, they're acknowledging it. It's been approved by senior management. Okay, these guys know who they're talking about. But the documentation, it really was something that they hit us up on, especially around awareness and training. Show us proof that you are actually doing the training that you need. And it's not just security training, it's operational training. Show us in your strategic plan where you're budgeting for this to make sure it's funded. That's probably going to be a pretty big revelation to a lot of folks, because it's not just having the firewall in place. It's not just having patching occur weekly or quarterly, whatever your defined cadence is. It's when you win the lottery and you and Andrew go to Bora Bora on vacation for 6 months. I'm sure Andrew is at least going to take his wife, or he hopefully will take me as well, since I'm bringing it up. But when you guys win the lottery and you go on vacation somewhere, whoever steps into what you're doing, is CUI still going to be protected? Are the tenets of what's being required of you still going to be followed? And that was really what they hit home about. And honestly, it was probably 2 solid days of just documentation related items.
Sounds pretty intense.
I did have a full head of hair before this started, just to let you know. So
I seem to remember that. So, Andrew, we deal with a lot of government contractors, and really there's quite a few of them that just want to have us set up the environment and hand the reins over to us to kind of manage and provide that managed service provider offering. Can you kind of provide us some context around how we manage our DIB clients?
Yeah, so we have kind of a split managed service right now between what we have in commercial and the defense. And so we have a segment of our team that focuses on our defense customers and providing support for them. And similar to everybody else, kind of go the secure enclave route. Our whole kind of support matrix around there is built living in kind of a secure enclave. And so all of our support personnel access it through there. It's pretty locked down to who can access it, and inside there, just like everywhere else, connections going out are limited to just what's allowed. And to be fair, it's not a whole lot in there. Someone can't go in there and just start browsing the web to do whatever they want. And it's meant to really just allow them to access the tools to be able to support our customers. And so through that, we try to avoid kind of drive-by situations like Kaseya had, where someone just went through and exploited open servers and sites that anyone on the internet could hit. So that's locked down. Poses challenges because we kind of keep it to only IP addresses that we whitelist allowed to connect to us. But it gives us kind of the most control to make sure we're protected and reduce the risk, and let me sleep at night that I'm not going to come in the next morning and have a major incident. So we do that for our customers, and that lets them take it a step further from what just an enclave or GCI deployment would be, into now they can kind of roll over more of those IT tasks of kind of risk analysis when it comes to deploying something new or software, doing their patch management processes, change control, and all those things that relates to the IT We can't alleviate everything for you. There are still your internal processes, as Thomas alluded to. They're going to ask your marketer something. We're not your marketing company, so we're not managing your website and posting. So there's definitely things still on you, but through kind of providing that kind of responsibility matrix, you'll be able to hopefully offload a lot more onto us and make your kind of assessment a little easier on your employees and yourself.
Okay, all right. I guess, Thomas, what are some of the lessons learned for candidate C3PAOs and, OSCs looking to get ready for this process or are in the middle of this process?
First lesson learned: sleep is overrated. I think would be the biggest thing. I can see Andrew agreeing with me because he knows there was a lot of late nights, a lot of, hey, we're seeing this going on, why is this happening? Help us out here. But no, one of the biggest lessons learned, and I alluded to this earlier, is that scoping. I can't speak enough about how much that plays into you being successful or not, with being able to know where your information's at. And it just speaks to your maturity as an organization, which is what CMMC should do, because you can correctly identify where your data is, who has access to it, and where is it going. And it's almost like you're running a house. You've built your walls, you've built your individual rooms, you've got your windows, you got your doors, you've got your locks on the doors. You're identifying who you're giving keys to so they can come and go as they please. If you got kids going outside, hey, where are you going? Understanding where they're going to, where they're coming from, or at least where they should be coming from, as long as my son doesn't lie to me. But no, it's about, honestly, do you have good governance processes from the top of your organization? Do they live, breathe, and speak that this is our data? It's almost like it is your children. Do we know where it's at in our house? Do we understand how it's going to move from one area to the other, and who are we letting interact with our children, our data? Being able to scope that and show that very well, and have everybody from the CEO to the CFO, vice president of marketing, all the way down to myself, all telling that same story. Here's where it's at. Here's the only things that we're allowing access to it. I think really got us, very quickly over that initial hump with the assessors that, okay, these folks, they understand what's going on. Now we can get into, some other areas. And I mean, let's be honest, David, for the DIVCAC folks, this is new for them too. It's a new process. It's a new paradigm within the defense industrial base that for several years now you've been going through. You're doing self-attestation, you're doing your DFARS requirements, and so on and so forth. Now the CMMC comes into play, and CMMC, I tell folks, is that validation piece. Are you doing what you're saying you're doing? And at least for us, our biggest lessons learned, like I said, being able to have that scope, ensuring that everyone in our organization understood it and could speak intelligently to us, I think really took us a long way. So that way, I could sleep at least for maybe 2 hours a night as we were going through this.
All right. Last question here before we get to some of the Q&A is really, if you didn't pass your CMMC assessment, how long do you have to kind of close those gaps and remediate?
So if it's not a major thing, because you're not going to put a sim or a scene, however you pronounce it, in place in a very short time frame. But usually you have roughly about a 30-day window, is what we've been told. I think in certain some circumstances maybe a little bit longer, but this isn't just to say you're going to be able to do a POAM after you get through this. You're not. If it's something that's not major, they're going to give you a little bit of time, but when they come back, you better be absolutely sure it is corrected, or if not, you're probably going to go back in the hopper and have to wait for the next time the assessors are available. And when I'm talking minor, it's, you may have forgotten some piece of information that was in your documentation, but you're able to show it, you're able to speak to it, and it requires an update. But remember, when you're updating your documentation, this is a maturity process. So one of the maturity elements, okay, you're reviewing and you're updating, so make sure you identify in however you're tracking that now you've updated it. It's a new version of your documentation. So hopefully that makes sense.
No, makes perfect sense. So I'm going to head over to the Q&A section here. Looks like I have a question. Looks like it's for Andrew. If if a company did have to migrate data, what would the process with KTL or be like, and how would our information be secured? You're on mute, Andrew.
I got muted. Sorry about that. Yeah, that's a very important question regarding how the data is secured. There's a lot of options to migrate your data, mix between fully SaaS and on-premise. KTL takes the kind of approach that we want to make sure the data is kind of always controlled by us at some point. And so through that, we host all of the migration environments and we spin them up inside of Azure Gov, the same way that our kind of help desk and other managed service employees access the environment, so do the IT consultants and engineers doing your migration. And so we work very hard to make sure that environment is secured, compliant with the CMMC kind of rules or 171. And through that, we kind of only keep the data within the environment as long as it needs to be. And so we have servers, the environment's locked down, so nothing comes in. The servers make only outbound connections to what would be whitelist IPs. And so we've got a list as we go of various hosting providers. And so we're making outbound connections to your source, making outbound connections to the destination. And so at the end of kind of the process, none of your data lives on the server longer than it takes to just save it and move it up to the destination. And then we're left with kind of metadata of what was moved so we can provide a report. At the end of that whole process, we allow kind of Microsoft systems to make sure all that information is gone. And we set it up in kind of resource groups within there for each project. And once a customer signs off that the migration is good, and you'll get a project closeout document that you would sign off, and that would kick off a process where we go in, delete the resource group, make sure any artifacts related to your migration are gone. After that point, we can't recover the data. Microsoft says they can't recover the data. It goes into their kind of deletion by encryption process where they delete all the private keys for it. And so the data is more or less gone forever to everybody.
Okay. And Thomas, this sounds like a little bit of a joke, but or at least the start of a joke. How many auditors from DIBCAC did you have to work with to complete the assessment?
So leading up to the assessment, you really, and I'll say this, DIBCAC really did follow the CMMC assessment process. So, I definitely say thanks to them because they didn't throw us any curveballs in that part of the process. So with leading up to it, we really worked with the primary assessor, the lead assessor, if you will. When we got into the assessment, there was probably around 7 or 8 different folks from DIBCAC on the call. And that was the lead assessor, the assessors that were concentrated on particular areas. And I think there was maybe one or two other folks from DIBCAC on the phone, and that's, as I mentioned earlier, this is new to them, so they were learning the process. So more than likely that makes sense, but yeah, it was about 7 to 9 folks from DIBCAC on the phone.
And yeah, I got a couple questions here from the group as far as how long was the actual audit or assessment?
It was a week. Started on Monday. We went, started out, in the mornings with the in-brief, finished with an out-brief that was a recap of, for the day, rinse, repeat the next day, in-brief, recapping, closing with where it's at. And then on Friday was any remainders or any follow-ups that we needed to do, and then an out-brief. But yes, it was a full week.
Okay. And I guess there's a couple comments here about the lessons learned videos that you guys have posted up. You have a couple of them out. When are the next 2 lessons learned videos going to be showing up?
Sure. So we're currently working on additional lessons learned videos and webinars that we're going to be posting. I would expect to start seeing those here in about another week or 2. I can't speak to our marketing department just because that's not my swim lane, but yes, we do currently have plans for additional lessons learned videos, and they should be coming soon.
Okay. And a couple questions on around as far as the actual audit process itself, kind of, the documentation, when did they request that? Can you kind of speak at a high level on that process?
Sure. So part of the CMMC process is you go through what's called a readiness review. And honestly, for us, what that was is we took all of our documentation, screenshots, stuff we've gotten from, that we got from Microsoft, because here's a key part: just because you're using GCC High, you still have to show you understand how Microsoft is doing stuff. So we still had to have their information. So definitely understand that. But we literally took all of that and packaged it up with our SSP and the stuff that we had created, and sent it to DIBCAC. And then it's about 1 to 2 weeks that they go through it, and based upon that, that's how they determine if you're ready to go through assessment or not. Once we had made it through that process, then we were working off of a schedule. We were able to finalize our schedule, which meant they were showing up, and I think was 2 weeks after that we made it through the readiness review. So in a perfect world, you're looking from about a month from start to completion of your assessment. But just depending upon the size of the organization, the amount of documentation you have, it could be longer. That readiness review, it could be short. It all depends. I know when we finished printing out all the documentation that we had provided, the binder was probably 3.5 to 4 inches thick.
That's a lot of writing.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, there's one other question here. I guess it's around the CMMC levels. I guess there might be some confusion out in the industry of, do you have to go and do them in order, get level 1, level 2, and then level 3, or was it all level 3? No,
we sat for level 3, which covered all of the levels. As we were, our intent was we wanted to become a C3PAO. We had to go through that level 3 assessment. The differentiators really, and there's no really level 2 assessment. You can be assessed against level 2, but it doesn't help. It doesn't give you I shouldn't say it doesn't help. It doesn't give you a separate designation. But really, when you're talking level 1 and level 3. And again, this goes back to what I was talking about with scoping. Level 1, that's really for your FCI folks. For those folks that you're only going to have federal contract information. It is a very small subset of the CMMC domains, as well as the processes and practices that you have to deal with. Don't think just because you're doing level 1, you don't need any documentation, because I can guarantee you're still going to have that SSP, that system security plan. For level 3, really, you don't have to show that you're level 1 first, because if you become level 3, you're already satisfying the level 1 controls, and I should say the level 1 domain areas. So I know it's just slightly confusing with that answer, but hopefully it made a little bit of sense.
It makes perfect sense. And this one's kind of for you, Andrew. With regards to a secure enclave, how long does that process normally take to set something up like that in looks like greenfield?
Yeah, so from a brand new environment, excluding the process to get approved, like Azure Gov or GC High and those things, takes about 2 weeks to kind of stand up, do all the configurations now, and then go through everything with you so that you understand what's going on in the environment, what the pieces are, give you some of the documentation so that you can hopefully copy and paste it directly into your SSP, as well as some of the procedural type things of how would you do a certain task inside of Azure Virtual Desktop, or provision new users and kind of what that looks like. If there are some customizations, as I alluded to before, with kind of our manufacturing customers and requiring a VPN to go on premise to print or access other resources, that adds some time to it that generally gets scoped during the conversation as a kind of a separate work order and change order to the base implementation. And that can range a lot depending on what needs to be done. But from 0 to a desktop people can use with kind of the majority of your technical controls met, is probably about a 2-week process to get up and stood up and handed over to you.
Okay. I think you touched on this earlier, Andrew. But there's a question here about what are the most important factors when choosing the appropriate MSP or MSSP when it comes to CMMC. All those acronyms.
Yeah. The kind of most important factor is, are they even aware of what CMMC is? Are they aware of kind of the regulations put on you that you need to comply with? The majority of people are not approaching an MSP or MSSP to use them as like a subcontractor for their help desk type thing where they're bossing them around and telling them what to do. It's generally looked as for an advisor of, hey, we have this IT problem, what can we do? Can you monitor this, make sure things are working and fix it? And so if they're not aware of kind of your end goals and requirements, it's not going to end well. They may lead you down a path that is not going to help you out when you go through an assessment, or they're just not even aware that that's something that they're not allowed to do. And that opens up kind of more issues where you should probably have deeper conversations with them. As Thomas alluded to, a responsibility matrix, they're taking over some responsibilities from you. So as the MSP, they should at least be able to give you a matrix of some sort that shows what objectives they are actually taking care of and how hopefully they're taking care of it. And if there's anything that falls on you, or you also have to work with like onboarding employees and account management, maybe that's something you're having them do, but they're not doing the hiring process for you. So there's still some kind of shared responsibility of you need to vet the employees and do all those things, and then it gets handed over to them to do the provisioning and give them access. And so if they can give you all that information, that's a great leg up, because you're going to need that for your assessment process to be able to kind of point to them and say that's on them to do. And then ideally they'll be going, hopefully, shooting for equivalency of CMMC if they're not going to get assessed themselves, and they can provide you an SSP. So if the assessor asks you, how are they doing this to meet the CMMC assessment, if it comes to that, then you'll be able to give them that information. I think there's still some flux in the air of what requirements MSPs have. It seems to be a question on every town hall of, are they going to require a CMMC assessment? I think the last town hall, they brought up big FedRAMP moderate for CSPs and MSPs. I don't know if there was understanding of kind of the normal MSP of, I'm not hosting your data, I'm providing outsourced IT resources. And so none of the CUI is moving to me. So maybe I don't need to be FedRAMP moderate and just CMMC will work, or I just need to show that I'm equivalent to these things, that because time will tell. But I think at a basic, just making sure that your MSP and MSSP fully understand what your requirements are and can answer your questions articulately and responsibly.
Okay. All right. Well, looks like that's about all the questions. And we're almost at the top of the hour. So, gentlemen, I want to thank you for your time today. It was a pleasure moderating, and you know, I'm sure a lot of folks appreciate the education around CMMC and kind of what to expect from DIPCAC or from an actual CMMC assessment.
Thank you.
Okay.
It's good.
All right. Well, thank
you, Andrew.
Have a nice